In 1981, the United States military was losing the Cold War. The Soviet Union had more tanks, more missiles, more soldiers. And for the first time in decades, the balance of power was shifting. But inside a classified facility buried deep in the Nevada desert, a small group of American engineers were building something the Soviets had never seen before. A weapon so advanced, so completely unprecedented, that when the Soviets finally discovered it existed, they didn't just panic. They completely changed their entire military strategy. To understand why this weapon changed everything, you need to understand just how dangerous the world was in 1980. The Cold War wasn't just a political rivalry between two superpowers. It was a loaded gun pointed at the entire planet. The Soviet Union had assembled the largest conventional military force in human history, over 50,000 tanks lined up across Eastern Europe, ready to roll into Western Europe at a moment's notice. NATO's defenses were stretched thin. American military planners ran war games, simulated battles, and the results were terrifying. In most scenarios, Soviet forces broke through Western defenses within days. Something had to change. And it had to change fast. So in 1977, a small team inside the Pentagon began asking a question nobody had seriously asked before. What if the US built a weapon that the Soviets simply couldn't see? The project was called Have Blue. And it started not in a Pentagon boardroom, but in a small workshop inside Lockheed's legendary Skunk Works division in Burbank, California. Skunk Works was already famous for building impossible things. The U-2 spy plane, the State Route 71 Blackbird. But what they were asked to build now was something different entirely. An aircraft completely invisible to radar. The science behind it came from an unlikely place, a Soviet physicist named Pyotr Yefimtsev, who in 1964 had published a paper on how radar waves bounce off surfaces. The paper was so theoretical, so mathematical, that the Soviet government didn't even classify it. They thought it was useless. The Americans disagreed. Lockheed engineer Dennis Overholzer read Yefimtsev's equations and realized something extraordinary. If you built an aircraft with faceted, flat, angled surfaces, you could scatter radar waves away from the source, making the plane almost impossible to detect. The engineers built the ugliest aircraft anyone had ever seen. Sharp edges. Angular panels. It looked less like a fighter jet and more like a flying diamond cut in half. But when they tested it on radar, it showed up as something roughly the size of a marble. The prototype led to the most classified aircraft program in American history, the F-117 Nighthawk. Between 1981 and 1990, the U.S. Air Force built 59 of them in total secrecy. Pilots flew only at night. The planes were kept in hangars under guard 24 hours a day. The entire program was so classified that Congress was kept in the dark. The Soviets heard rumors. They picked up fragments of intelligence. But they couldn't confirm anything, because they couldn't find the aircraft on any of their radar systems. And that uncertainty alone began to change Soviet military planning. If the Americans had a weapon you couldn't see coming, a weapon that could fly undetected over Moscow, over Soviet command centers, over nuclear missile sites, then every military defense the Soviet Union had built was suddenly useless. All that money, all those missiles, all those tanks, none of it could stop a weapon you couldn't see. The psychological impact was enormous. Soviet generals began diverting massive resources into new radar programs, trying to detect something they weren't even sure existed. Resources that were already stretched thin. Resources the Soviet economy could not afford. The world finally saw the F-117 in action on January 17, 1991, the first night of Operation Desert Storm. While Iraqi radar operators stared at empty screens, F-117 Nighthawks flew directly over Baghdad, one of the most heavily defended cities on Earth, and destroyed command centers, communication hubs, and air defense systems with pinpoint precision. It wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration. The planes flew 1,271 missions during the Gulf War. Not a single one was shot down. Not one was even detected by enemy radar until it was already too late. When the footage was released, grainy night vision video of precision bombs going through the exact windows of buildings, the world was stunned. But the Soviets had known something like this was coming. And by 1991, the Soviet Union was already collapsing under the weight of an arms race it could no longer keep up with. The Cold War was over. And America's invisible weapon had helped end it, not by firing a single shot against the Soviets, but by making them realize they were already defeated. The F-117 Nighthawk was officially retired in 2008. But the technology it pioneered lives on in every stealth aircraft flying today: the B-2 Spirit, the F-22 Raptor, the F-35. The weapon built in secret, in the Nevada desert, by a handful of engineers who dared to ask an impossible question, changed the balance of global power forever. If you want to know about the next classified weapons program the US built after the F-117, one that's still classified to this day, make sure you subscribe to War Chamber. Hit the notification bell. We upload every week. And remember, the most powerful weapons in history are usually the ones nobody knew existed.